Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a little while since you've seen three of us in the screen, but the three amigos are back in the building, ladies and gentlemen. Fourth and Frames is in the house, week 12. It's Rhett Manuel. It's Nate Markham. It's Drew Scott. We're home, baby. We're back. And tonight we are going to hit on our week 12 smash, pass, and stash players. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
Listeners, watchers, subscribers, whoever you are, you're locked in with Fourth and Frames. As I said, I'm Rhett Manuel. That's Drew Scott. He's Nate Markham. And for the first time in a month, we are all back together. And if this is the night where you just decided to click for the first time and you're like, who are these three? Because we've only seen two of them for the past month or so, like it's some sort of rotation. Nah, it's us. And if you like what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and review to catch anytime a new podcast or short form drops from us. Don't forget to lock in at fantasyandframes.com. Plays and fades, latest articles, rankings, takes, news and notes, all the good stuff. Drew, it's been a month since we've all been together. So in the time that we've been here, I don't want to mislead you or anything, but I want to take the time to pick on Nate because the Kansas City Chiefs are no longer undefeated. So Nate, the floor is yours. The 9-1 KC Chiefs taken down by the Buffalo Bills. Are you in mourning? Are you excited? Where you at, buddy?
I am perfectly fine. That was a great game by Buffalo. Do you want to lose? No, but I can tell you, usually getting that kind of off your back a little bit is never it's never a good thing. Don't let me trick you. But I don't think it's as bad. It shows that they can go on the road, hostile territory, still compete. Even though no one's going to say they're playing, they're not playing undefeated football. I'm not going to, sugarcoat that either. It is what it is. They don't look the part, but man, when it comes down to it, you need something. Granted, the interception, but Josh Allen watching that game, I've always said I've never been a beat 'em up type of guy. I think Josh Allen is a stud, and that last run that he had to seal it just proved.
Man,
if I'm starting an offense, starting a football team, Josh Allen's one of my 2, if not 3 players that I'm starting that team with. So, yeah, hats off to Buffalo. I can't wait to hopefully. Well, I don't want to see him again in the playoffs. Let's be honest.
It probably won't be the last time we see those two teams play.
Yeah, it's going to be good. This is the stretch we've all been waiting for.
And Drew, how are things on your end now that since it's been a month over the past month, all of a sudden? Now all of your Rams wide receivers are healthy. So how are we living right now, buddy?
Yep. They're back just in time for an absolutely brutal stretch of the schedule. So it's good that everybody's healthy, man, because they're going to need every single body that they can get. But it's good though, man. I mean, it's a lot better than living in the world where I was afraid Cooper Kupp was going to get traded because the season was looking like it was going in such a poor direction. So I can't really complain. Things are looking up at least.
Yeah. Same here, guys. A couple weeks ago, Dennis Allen gets fired, and all of a sudden we bring in Darren Rizzi, a.k.a. the Rizzler, to come through and do his thing. And all of a sudden, 2 straight wins, 35-14 over the terrible Cleveland Browns. But who cares?
Taysom Hill, man.
Who cares who the wins are coming against? Taysom Hill had the absolute game of his life. Man, all of a sudden, y'all go see me be unbearable real quick once again, guys. I'm sorry. That's what happens when you get 2 wins and you don't know how to handle yourself. So that's just where I am right now, boys.
You should be mad more than anything, man. Now you guys are going to pick 12th instead of getting to pick 4th.
You're right. You're right.
Well, they won't need to go after wide receiver now that they have MVS, the superstar that is the number 1 wide receiver outside of Taysom Hill, if you want to consider that, whatever that is, in New Orleans now.
No, Nate, you didn't. I was telling Drew the other day, I came across a TikTok video where some podunk pundit on TikTok who wants to be a superstar said that a Kansas City Chiefs legend could help turn the Saints season around. And Drew goes, I'm not even sure MVS knew he was a Kansas City Chiefs legend, but hey, it's
that is
fine.
certainly a word to describe it. That is
definitely
you can choose.
Among the words you could choose to describe MVS. That could be one of them.
Yeah.
So speaking of MVS and the Saints, we got some bye weeks, guys, and we get into news and notes. It's a heavy hitter this week on bye weeks. Atlanta Falcons, which means no Bijan, no Darnell Mooney, no Drake London, no Kyle Pitts. So, you have 4, no Tyler Algier, 5 viable fantasy guys there that are out. The Buffalo Bills, I mean, we just got done talking about Josh Allen, James Cook having a great season. Couple guys that are at least flex worthy on that team. Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow having the season of his life, and they happen to be 4-7. But Jacksonville Jaguars, skip. New Orleans Saints, outside of Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill, whenever he turns it on, mostly a skip. And the New York Jets. So there are a few teams that are definitely going to affect some lineups this week. I'll start with you, Nate. Which of these players you think is going to be the most sorely missed in fantasy lineups this week among this bye week?
I mean, the dearth of wide receivers that there is, of running backs that there is, I would have to say Bijan. He's really he was taking that workload that we've been wanting. It had been trending more in his direction away from Algier each week. And then trying to replace Bijan is just tricky. It feels like the wide receivers are a little bit easier to replace as far as return, especially with the names we've lacked there. Jamar Chase, of course, that's going to be damn near impossible to replace.
Yeah.
But
I was going to say, except for Jamar Chase.
except for Jamar Chase. And that might be 1 and 1A for me. I don't know. What about you, Drew?
Yeah. No, that was the first thing that came to mind was Jamar Chase, and then Bijan immediately followed. But yeah, I mean those two guys. Drake London's been great. Breece Hall has been kind of up and down, but he's still somebody that you depend on every week. So this is a rough bye week, man. I've got a lot of players on a lot of these teams, and whenever I loaded up Sleeper this morning, a lot of my rosters did not look good for this week. So I'm already ready. It makes no sense. All right, we got all these teams on bye this week. And then next week, there's nobody on bye. So you're like, oh, okay, we're done with bye weeks. Everything's good. But no, and then week 14, there's more bye weeks. Like, what are we doing, NFL? Like, you cannot convince me. The person that makes the schedule for the NFL has to hate fantasy football. There's no other explanation for it. They hate fantasy football, and they stick it. That is their one opportunity to stick it to us is by making the schedule. And you can't convince me otherwise.
So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a sneaky bye week miss this week. We mentioned Bijan Robinson. We mentioned Jamar Chase. Raise your hand if you realize that Darnell Mooney was wide receiver 9 on the season.
That's wild, man.
Yeah. And Drake London is wide receiver 6 or 7 at this point too. So the Falcons are fielding one of the top 2 running backs in fantasy and 2 of the top 10 wide receivers in fantasy right now. So, I mean, that's a fun fantasy offense, man. And I agree with you, Drew. Like the lineup and how they set it up and everything is terrible, but we got to play with what we got to play with. So,
quick question for you guys then. Knowing that there's a lot of chatter about Michael Penix Jr. potentially taking over the quarterback helm for some reason, why that has, continuously surfaced as far as rumor. What do you do if you have London and Mooney and not going to have necessarily an effect on Bijan? It'll have an indirect effect, of course, but how far of a drop off do you think that will have, or will Atlanta actually do something that, to me, crazy?
I don't think it happens. I think they're riding out with Captain Kirk the rest of the way. But if we live in the hypothetical, if it was to happen, I'm still firing up all the guys that I'm used to starting. Like I'm still playing Mooney, I'm still playing London, I'm still playing Pitts, I'm still playing Bijan. So it's not going to cause me to want to sit anybody. Honestly, at this point, if you look at the yards per route run for Odunze, McMillan, Jalen Polk, and how they've kind of underperformed this year, and there are other factors with their individual teams that are contributing to that. But I'm just saying, if you just in a vacuum, if you look at that, it's like man, how good was Michael Penix Jr. actually to be uplifting all these guys at Washington? Like, was he just like this superstar quarterback or what? But, but no, I mean, in all seriousness, I don't think it happens. But if it does, I'm still going to fire up all the same guys I've been playing.
And here's my question real quick for Atlanta Falcons fans. As a Saints fan, I'm coming off an inherent bias right now. But when the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins, like, they've watched the tape, right? They understand that Kirk Cousins is going to have 4 touchdown weeks one week and then go 238 for 0 touchdowns and an interception the next week. Like, they've seen that. They've seen the film, correct?
Yeah.
Like,
so.
you know who he is. So I can't get into fan mode right now, but I just think as a fantasy quarterback, anyone who's owned Kirk Cousins at any time in their life knows the struggle. You know that he is, for lack of a better way of putting it, a tremendous best ball quarterback, because there's going to be those weeks like he had earlier this year where he throws for 504 touchdowns. There's going to be a week where he throws for 380 and 3 touchdowns. Then you better have that backup plan, because there's going to be a 180 and a touchdown coming somewhere in there along the line. So, I mean, this is just who Kirk Cousins is. And, I mean, if they were expecting anything else, I don't know what to say. But I digress. Sure. Let's keep moving. Let's keep talking injuries. DeAndre Swift currently battling a groin injury. Ladies and gentlemen, is it finally Roschon Johnson season, or will that never, ever happen?
If there was ever going to be a time, it's got to be now. If Swift misses, I mean, Khalil Herbert's not in the way to mess anything up anymore. So it should be all systems go for Roschon if Swift misses. So we'll see who that goes. I forget who, but the Bears play. The Bears play Minnesota this week, so that's like the second toughest matchup for fantasy. It's funny. I was just about to say we should get Keith up here for this discussion, and then here he is in the YouTube comments. That's hilarious. So I mean, he's got a matchup against Minnesota this week, and Detroit follows that. So that, and then a matchup with San Francisco, and then Minnesota and Detroit after that. So I mean, I've already made the case weeks ago about why you should have sold high on DeAndre Swift because of this brutal schedule that's coming up, and now that brutal schedule is here. And so you should pick up Roschon if he's out there just in case, but it's going to be tough to be very excited about starting him most weeks moving forward, though.
Yeah, I got to agree with that. A couple big returns coming in this week. Isaiah Pacheco. Nate Markham rejoices, even though Kareem Hunt has been solid. And Mike Evans also set to return in week 12. So, Drew, are you firing up either of those guys this week 100% with confidence, or what?
Mike Evans, definitely. I mean, they're already saying that he's expected to play. I'm putting him back in my lineup. Pacheco, if he's a full participant this week and they say he's good to go, they play Carolina this week. So, I'm putting Pacheco in my lineup right away as well. I'm with that 100%. Last week, 88% of short down and distance snaps, 82% of long down and distance snaps, 67% inside the 5, 100% 2-minute drill, and saw 10 carries for the first time since week 5 for Roschon. So, as Keith said, pick him up. Even if DeAndre Swift plays, you should still pick up Roschon. He's still a viable handcuff, and this time in the fantasy season, that's what you want your bench to be full of. It's just handcuffs, guys that we're confident would handle the majority of the work if the person in front of them went down. So that doesn't fit for handcuffs across the board. But Roschon is one of those guys to where if the starter in front of him goes down, you would assume he would get a large majority of the work, as Keith laid out for us right there. So. Yeah, 100% pick him up, and you could possibly start him if Swift is out. But that's the only way I personally would start Roschon. Like, even though he did see an uptick in work last week, I'm not putting him in my lineup unless Swift is out.
Right. Hard to disagree with that. Nate, I'm going to jump to you now. Jonathan Brooks may finally play this week. I mean, does it even matter? I mean, this is a brutal matchup. We're going to talk about Chuba Hubbard and why he's a not play a little bit later in this show. But I mean, Jonathan Brooks, we kind of been waiting all year, 2nd round draft capital. And then Chuba Hubbard pops off and messes around and gets a 4-year, $33 million contract extension. Therefore, definitely muddying the waters and making a lot of people doubt whether Jonathan Brooks will ever even be a thing. So what's your thoughts?
Before you get into that real quick, I just want to clarify. It is a 4-year contract, but his contract becomes very cuttable after 2025. It's basically like a 1-year extension with possibly some added years, but his contract is very cut friendly after 2025. So it just 4-year extension sounds very scary whenever you don't put the other stuff in there with that. So just for clarification, but sorry, Nate, go ahead.
No. You said exactly what one of the pieces of that was going to be accentuated is that, short term, it does hurt for Jonathan Brooks. He's one of the most difficult cuts that I've had on many teams just because, well, for one, he's been able to be on an IR spot. And two, I don't think that the Carolina Panthers are that great of a team right now where if he were to get the Lions, or get into the game with Chuba, the volume doesn't equate to the hype that I had for him before the season. Now, Chuba's shown that he can still get good fantasy production behind a bad team, but yeah, it's just, what's the max expectation? Maybe 75-25 to start off for the next couple weeks. And then all of a sudden, you're in the playoffs and you can't trust Jonathan Brooks in the playoffs no matter what, unless you're, week 14 and that bye week situation hits you and all of a sudden you just need a healthy body at all. And that might be the only saving grace for me and other Jonathan Brooks owners.
Yeah, the thing with the Panthers schedule coming up is they have Kansas City this week, Tampa week 13, and Philly week 14. Those are three pretty tough run defenses. My hope, as somebody that has Jonathan Brooks in several places, my biased hope is that by week 15, Jonathan Brooks has shown some signs of life. He's starting to look really good, and he starts to gain a role right during the fantasy playoffs because they have Dallas and Arizona weeks 15 and 16, which are two great matchups for fantasy running backs. So if we can get some clarity on what Jonathan Brooks' role is before the fantasy playoffs, he might end up being a good play for you at that point because the matchups are much more friendly. But these next couple weeks are going to be tough.
Yeah, and so let's go to Keith with a question in the chat. He said, where are you guys on Romadunze? He's another guy who saw a big uptick with a new OC like Roshan Johnson did. I guess I'll go ahead and start. For Romadunze, I've kind of been flashed. He's kind of flashed here and there all year. A couple weeks ago against Arizona, he had 5 catches for 104 yards. But last week was his highest target share since week 3 when he finished as a wide receiver 1 and he caught 6 balls for 112 yards and a touchdown. Last week he catches 6 balls on 10 targets, 65 yards. Not an eye-popping stat line, but an eye-popping target share. So if that's the case, if he continues to come out here and get 20% target shares for the remainder of the season, he's at least a strong flex start for teams. What do you guys think?
Yeah, he still ran one less route than Keenan Allen last week, but he had an almost 54% air yard share, 10 targets, the most receiving yards on the team, the highest yards per route run last week. His role looks like it's improving. And that's typically there's some of these rookie receivers that we've had lately, man, with like Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr. to an extent, and Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, their rookie years. They've kind of just muddied the waters of what you expect from rookie receivers, but this is what we typically expect to see is down the second half of the year, you start to see the guys kind of emerge. And so moving forward, I don't think this is a hot take or anything, but moving forward, Romadunze would be the receiver that I would want in the Bears room over DJ Moore and Keenan Allen.
Yeah, the whole system in Chicago creates just enough doubt for me not to ever feel comfortable starting really any of them. It starts with Caleb Williams. It goes all the way through with this kind of hodgepodge of where's the target funnel going to come from? Is it a schemed funnel or is it just opportunity where Caleb's trying to do his progressions? And so far what I've seen, I haven't seen, enough direction going towards a Dunze that I feel 100% comfortable yet. But going forward, if we were starting to draft right now and we had to choose one of the 3, the highest ceiling for the 3 in my eyes probably is a Dunze. The problem is that floor and the ceiling both are capped, unfortunately, until that system really straightens out.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's just get through a couple more of these. Zamir White and Alexander Madison, both DNPs on Wednesday, which leaves the Raiders running back room to currently be Amir Abdullah and Dylan Lave. So, not great, Bob, but is either one of those guys worth a flyer this week if you're desperate?
It's not enough injuries or bye weeks in the world that would would make me start either one of those guys.
I'll give a little let's say PSA for the Scott Fishbowl contestants that are in need of some replacements this week. If you look at the total number of kickoffs and kick returns, now granted, Scott Fishbowl, for people that don't play in it, really accentuates kick return yardage. Now, when we look at Amir Abdullah, when it comes to the scenario, so like Denver, shockingly, has one of the highest percentage of returnable kicks in the league, which you would think home versus away, man, Denver, they've got to have a ton of touchbacks, but that's not the case so far. Granted, I say so far, we're 11 weeks into the season, but if you're in Scott Fishbowl and you're really, really struggling, now's a great time that Amir Abdullah not only will get touches in the backfield, but there's a good chance that he's returning kicks that should be returnable. So you're going to get a nice little steady floor, I'm hoping at least. For again, that's directed towards the Scott Fishbowl as far as that goes.
Yeah. Can't relate. My Scott Fishbowl team sucks, and I'm not in the playoffs, so I can't relate to needing to care about any of that, But hey, to those of you that are, and have better teams than me, aka both of these guys above me, that is very, very noteworthy. So getting back to Roshan real quick, do we throw out the efficiency metrics from this season up to this point? Now that Roshan has a new OC, does that lift up your hopes for Roshan at all if he does end up playing at any starting reps if Swift misses time?
My rule of thumb is always that opportunity matters. And if those numbers that Keith spit out from last week come through again this week, then at this point, whether Roshan is efficient or not, if he's getting 16 to 20 opportunities in a game and knowing the pass catcher that he is, 5 of those are probably going to be receptions. So you're probably looking at about 15 carries. If he's inefficient, 46, 47 yards on the high end, probably about 70 yards, and 5 catches for another, probably 30 yards. Then you're looking at that's a solid 15-point fantasy week if he were to come through on the high end without a score. So, I mean, that's a startable week for me. So I would say, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't think you throw out his efficiency metrics in the sense of you try to not believe that that's who he is as a player. I think you should believe that he, believe what he shows you in a sense of who he is as a running back. But hopefully a new offensive coordinator will help improve the offense a little bit, but the offensive line still is what it is too. And we have got a battle going on in the YouTube comments right now. We've got Jorge throwing the 28-3 shade at Keith. And then we got Keith firing back with that Washington's 0-2 versus teams with a winning record. The good bad team, the Washington Commanders. So we got a little friendly fight in the YouTube comments, and then friend of the show, friend of Fantasy and Frames, family of Fantasy and Frames, Keith Fleming, 381st, and Scott Fishbowl.
Very nice, very nice. I think there's
well done. I think he said this was his first year in Scott Fishbowl too.
Nice.
So.
I think there's 6 or 7 of us that are in the playoffs right now. And so from Fantasy and Frames group. So I would like for it to, be 8 or 9 if you two had done it. But
hey, I'm in the playoffs, buddy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just think he is.
Yeah. You literally just told me that we both were in. And I saw yours and you're doing great. So forget what I just said. Only focus on me.
And I did that without focusing on kick return yards either, because I said heading into the year that I'm not even going to lie. Pre-draft Scott Fishbowl, I was like, I'm not doing all this kick return research, not knowing what the kick return is going to look like. So I punted kick returns. And you know what? We still are where we are. So, hey, that's even better. So
well done, fellas. Well done.
All right. Last thing in our news and notes, George Kittle back this week. He is the leader amongst tight ends and touchdown receptions this year with 7. So he's obviously very startable. You're probably plugging him in no matter what. But should we expect a low floor this week for George Kittle or what?
I never expected a lower floor for Kittle. I mean, if you look at tight ends in the NFL that have finished as on a weekly basis like he has, he's pretty much the lone wolf out there that's consistently been – at or near the top in tight end scoring week in and week out. So I will tell you, going back to beginning of most seasons, I kind of fade George Kittle because I always thought he was the 28 or 3 points. You see how I worked that into again.
Mm.
So that's obviously hyperbole, but that was George Kittle, 3 touchdowns with 3 catches. And this year we're seeing a trend. Is that because, no Brandon Ayuk and Devo's been banged up and no CMC? Of course. But I think his floor is still tied in 1 on the week.
Wow.
Yeah. Purdy just continues to look for him, man. And he's got Green Bay this week. They're kind of middle of the road against the tight end, so it's not necessarily a bad matchup, not a great matchup. But George Kittle certainly is not one of those guys that needs a good matchup to be a good start for fantasy purposes. So yeah, if he truly is active this week, I'm firing him up with no hesitations whatsoever.
Yeah, man, gotta agree with all of those things. So before we get into our smash, pass, and stash players, let's talk about Underdog, formerly known as Underdog Fantasy. And they're offering us free money if you use that promo code FRAMES. Like we said, Nate Markham, we know you're out here snapping necks and cashing checks on a weekly basis. So if you put in $1,000 at Underdog, they will match your deposit up to $1,000. So, for a big high roller like you, Underdog is the way to go right now. So don't miss out on all the fun and all the action over at Underdog today, ladies and gentlemen. So let's get into our Week 12 Smash, Fashion, Stash players. Keep in mind, a Smash player is someone outside the top 20 wide receivers, top 15 running backs, top 8 tight ends, and top 12 quarterbacks. A pass player is someone that's inside the top 35, top 20 running backs, top 12 tight ends, or top 20 quarterbacks that we expect to go below their expectation. And a stash player is someone that we like rostered that is in under 50% of sleeper leagues roster. So we're going to go ahead and let's go and start with our boy, Nate Markham.
Yes, sir.
There was a player that I came in heading into the season that I was kind of touting, and people were like, well, Red is being silly with this one. I believe the quote was from Chris Battister: you can make anybody look good if you pull the right stats. Well, Rico Dotto has in fact emerged as a pretty solid fantasy running back this season. So tell us why he is a smash play against Jorge's Washington Commanders this week.
It'd be easy to pick on they're a good team against bad teams or a bad team against good teams defense, but they have been. And let's be honest, what does Dallas need the most in this game to stay competitive? They need to be able to get away from third and distances and be able to eat up some chunk yards in early downs. Typically with Cooper Rush at the helm, I would say that's going to be challenging, but this is kind of not the immovable object versus the unstoppable force type thing. This is Rico Dowdle, who getting volume, touched on that earlier, Rhett, 10 plus attempts in each of the past 3. He was finally named the lead back going into last week, which is kind of another little positive if it took 11 weeks to go in, which is just ridiculous. Which is, that if that's not a testament to the Dallas Cowboys as a whole on the season, what else is there? He's got 14 targets over that same stretch, 8th most amongst all running backs. Washington, as far as explosive plays, here's where they're going to pick up the chunk yards. Washington's allowed the 2nd highest percentage of 5+ yard runs on the season. If you can get those early down runs where, honestly, guess what? That's what Rico Dowdle has done really well. He's had he's got, good 5+ yard stretch over the run. They allow the 6th highest of 10+ yards. So we know that an offense isn't going to move the ball great. We just have to assume that with Dallas. But if the explosive runs can happen, Washington's been susceptible to them. Most rushing yards allowed, 5th highest explosive rush rate allowed. Those 2 factors, you drop in, just another, consistent 5 targets a game is what he's basically doing over the last 3. So you give me 5 targets and 10 plus touches in the backfield against an exposable defense, then I'm going to say as the RB25 in ECR, I'm more than happy, especially in a very heavy bye week. Where I don't think that's going to – Rico Dowdle won't lead the Sunday morning starter sit column like last week and other weeks where you really have to make that decision. He'll be, I would say, a must start on most teams other than the very fortunate ones.
And that's coming from the man that was the 2nd most accurate ranker according to Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings from last week. So well done, Nate. That stuff is not easy, man. This is my first year in the ECR, and it's not as easy as you've made it look over the last couple of years. And another solid week last week. I'm glad you brought the heat because I had my worst week in like a month this past week. So I'm glad that the Fantasy and Frames website at least had one solid set of rankings last week. Yeah, I agree. I like Rico a lot this week.
Yeah, same. So, Drew, we're going to keep this running back train rolling. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have the New York Giants, and Bucky Irving has been part of having a pretty good rookie season and is kind of just been in somewhat of a timeshare. But why is he the guy this week against the Giants?
Before I get into that, I want to throw this up here real quick because I think this is a really good point. Juwan Jennings, 41.8 first read target share in 3 games played, with one of Debo or Ayuk off the field so far this year, which is second to only Malik Neighbors. And as Keith said, we've got Kittle back. Debo's going to be playing. They're going to have. I mean, Ayuk obviously isn't there, but they're going to have the full allotment of weapons this week. So it will be interesting. Juwan Jennings has been a solid, wide receiver 2 flex play for the last few weeks. So it will be very interesting to see how he factors into the offense with all those guys, in the lineup. So, but yeah, Bucky Irving. With how well Bucky has run the ball this year, I'm honestly surprised that he hasn't been given a higher snap share in this backfield yet. But I feel like it might be on the way with the Bucks coming off their Week 11 bye. Rachaad White, he's still the guy in the pass game, but Bucky Irving is averaging more yards per carry. He has a higher explosive run percentage. He's handled a higher percentage of carries inside the 5-yard line. He has a higher touchdown rate, and his missed tackles forced per attempt is double Rachaad White's. I mean, just across the board, whenever it comes to running the ball, Bucky Irving has been the better runner on the year. So it's hard for me to see a world where his role doesn't increase at least some coming out of the bye week. That's just typically what we see with rookies a lot of times is they get that post-bye bump that we wait for, right? So I'm hoping that's going to be the case for Bucky. But even if it doesn't, he was the running back 7 in the Bucs last game in Week 10 against the 49ers on just 46% of snaps. And so now this week, Bucky gets a matchup against the New York Giants, who have been the 7th best matchup for running backs based on schedule-adjusted fantasy points given up to the position over the last 6 weeks. So very friendly very, very friendly matchup for fantasy running backs with the New York Giants. And call me crazy, but with Tommy Cutlets at quarterback, I'm going to go ahead and predict a positive game script for the Bucs this week. I love the memes. Everything is great, but the reality is he's not a very good quarterback, and I don't think that New York is going to see much success. And so I think that Tampa Bay is going to handle this game. I think the Bucs should have a positive game script, which should hopefully lead to some more carries for Bucky Irving, because newsflash, if you didn't know this, whenever teams are up, they run the ball more. So given the matchup and my hope for Bucky's increased role following the bye week, fingers crossed, he's a smash play for me this week.
Yeah, and I mean, Keith wants to know, we love you, Keith. If Mike Evans is back, does this in the pass catching success for guys like Rachaad White and Cade Otton? And he says he loves your Bucky Irving call this week. So yeah, Keith Fleming, seal of approval. But
I love that.
Be right back.
But Mike Evans coming back worries me more for Cade Otton than it does Rachaad White. Baker loves to dump the ball off to the running back. I don't think that will change necessarily with Mike Evans on the field, because in the targets Mike Evans usually gets, those have usually already materialized by the time he needs to dump it off to Rachaad White if he needs to. So it doesn't concern me too much for that, but I am a little bit concerned for Cade Otton. I do think he's still a startable tight end given the tight end landscape. And Chris Godwin's going to be out for the year, so you don't have to worry about that coming back. But so I'd be more concerned for Otton than White personally.
Nate?
I'm never concerned for Cade Otton. I'll never, not even if there's a fire, Cade Otton until I die. I thought I was dying because I heard something upstairs. It's like it blew up, but it wasn't. It was just probably us celebrating, the Buffalo Bills victory like we do around here with reverse curse. Sorry. Continue.
GG's for the Buffalo Bills. Yeah.
Shut up.
So Nate had a smash play in Rico Dowdle. Drew had a smash play in Bucky Irving. I'm just going to keep the RB trifecta and complete it with Jaylen Warren playing the Cleveland Browns this week, guys. Heads into the week as the ECR running back 29, and Nate mentioned all the bye weeks we have this week. So guys who are around that running back 30 range, tend to pick up a little more value this week, first of all. And the biggest thing to notice with Jaylen Warren over the past couple of weeks is that he is finally healthy. And while he may not be eating into that Najee Harris snap share so much, he only played 33% of snaps last week. He is touching the ball an awful lot with that very small snap share that he had. He's been efficient the past 2 weeks. He had 8.5 and 8.8 half PPR points. 16 opportunities 2 weeks ago, 13 opportunities last week, both on less than 50% of snaps. Had 4 receptions on 4 targets last week. In full PPR formats, he's been a running back 2 each of the past 2 weeks. He goes into a matchup with the Cleveland Browns, who have not been very good defensively this year. And a big kicker for the Pittsburgh Steelers is that they're currently number 2 in the league in rush attempts per game as a team. So Jaylen Warren is going to see the ball, whether it is in the running game or the passing game. He's going to get some opportunities, even with a small snap share. And when he does, one of the things that makes him so good is the fact that he is evasive as he is. He's got a 22% juke rate on the year. I believe that is top 18 among running backs, which means he would be number 18, but nonetheless, still counted. Still a pretty good juke rate from Jaylen Warren. And he is one of these guys that, like we said, we struggled with owning him for a little while. But if you stayed the course and you didn't drop him, you're now starting to get a guy that is getting healthy and therefore is going to be an excellent flex option for the rest of the season.
Yeah. What's crazy is that when Warren really returned, both him and Najee took an uptick. And I think that I think there's some offenses that really blossom when you have that consistent dual back threat where you keep defenses on their heels even more so. And Cleveland, as you said, has been rough. And the linebacking situation in Cleveland is bad. And with the speed, explosive opportunities that Jaylen Warren possesses, I could see him even really break one out on top of the target share, which should support a really good floor. So Jaylen Warren, perfect, like you said, bye week guy that's going to sit on your bench that you're not just going to take a 2 or 3 point week out of and really struggle. You could see, a borderline, I don't want to say RB1 week, but a middle of the pack RB2 is perfectly acceptable in this chaos.
100%.
All right, so we talked running backs. Now getting into our second smash play. Nate Markham, you're heading up to the land of Yankee Doodle, the Tea Party, the Red Sox, the Celtics, gross. But one thing you do like is Hunter Henry against the Miami Dolphins.
I do. I heard a lot of chatter that the Dolphins are a difficult matchup, and Hunter Henry is one of those scenarios, maybe not necessarily to avoid, but to be cautious with. And I don't feel the same way. I really like this matchup. Granted, Miami can pose threats where they've actually done decently well against tight ends when you look at the overall rankings, but you got to take that kind of within context. And so part of the context, at least from the Hunter Henry side, is we all have seen this. The evolution of Drake May to Hunter Henry, where with May under center, Henry ranks in the following. He's 7th in targets amongst tight ends, 6th in receptions, 4th in yards, 5th in first read, 7th in first read percentage. It's the matchup that people were concerned about, which is Miami. And if you look some of the weeks where they've taken on, I mean, let's be honest, it's, Jacksonville in week 1, Evan Ingram hadn't got started yet. And you get Indy a couple times, which is not much. Tennessee's not much, but they've allowed the tight end 6 overall, the tight end 5 overall, the tight end 1 overall last week, which was Brock Bowers. And then 2 weeks is tight end 19 and 17. And all of these weeks, now 19 and 17 doesn't stand out, except for those are 2 of the weeks where it was tight end palooza. And even with like 13 points with no touchdowns, that's the one area where
was that National Tight End Week whenever every tight end went crazy? Oh, okay.
Except Hunter, except against Miami. Well,
right.
And I looked even further. I was like, all right, well, if they've allowed the 6, the 5, the 1, and multiple other tight end like 2 weeks, are those based off of touchdown supported weeks? No, only one of those weeks, only one of all of their weeks, they've allowed a touchdown to a tight end, and that was last week against Vegas, which is a little concerning. When you say it, and I say it, and I hear myself saying those words, I'm like, Oh, so they've only allowed 1 touchdown to tight ends. Yes. But would I say that they're capable of completely shutting down everybody? The tight ends that have scored have 2 of which, so Brock Bowers was 1. They allowed 1 other one. I apologize, and I don't know who that person is. So it was it's almost like the bend not break. But
would you say that they're the Washington Commanders of facing tight ends? They're good against the bad ones, but they're bad against the good ones.
Oh, I would
like that.
I would say they're very bad against the good ones, and they're still not great against the good ones or bad ones. So yeah, if this is a beat up on Jorge, in this case, I think I've talked way too long in circles right now. Hunter Henry against Miami. I love the matchup. He's a tight end 9. I'm good to go.
I knew that he had been good since Drake May took over, but I didn't realize just how good compared to the other tight ends until you read off some of those numbers. That was kind of surprising. And I have no idea who could have possibly typed this out from the Fantasy and Frames account. But, shout out to Jorge and the Commanders. We still love you. No idea where that could have come from. Yeah, I had to feel it. It was probably Rhett. And this guy,
Rugaroo.
Good to see you, buddy.
We've missed you. Glad you're back. You're back. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I like Hunter Henry a lot this week.
And Drew, getting into your second smash play, we went from there's no way they're gonna throw the ball with any efficiency at all this season to holy hell, are the Los Angeles Chargers actually decent through the air? And number 2, is QJ a legit fantasy option? Talk about it for us this week, buddy.
Yeah, so I want to clarify 2 things. Number 1, I was not 100% in that category just because I don't believe you can bottle up Justin Herbert. I don't give a shit who your head coach is or your offensive coordinator is. Whenever you have a quarterback as good as Justin Herbert, you are going to throw the ball eventually. So I was not as low on Herbert, and that was not a good take for the large majority of the season. It looks like it's finally starting to work out. But and then number 2. If you're still with us, Keith, I know you're probably like, why the hell are we talking about QJ whenever Ladd McConkey's on the team? A wide receiver has to be outside of the top 20 receivers in the expert consensus rankings for the week to be considered for smash, and Ladd is inside the top 20. So I cannot talk about Ladd. I apologize for that. But now that we got those out of the way, Quentin Johnston, man, if you would have told me this offseason that I would be excited to start Quentin Johnston in week 12 of this season, I would have said that you are insane. But here we are. Ladd has established himself as the go-to guy in the passing offense, but QJ is the wide receiver 37 in PPR points per game so far this year, and that's only 4 spots lower than Ladd. Right now, QJ has an ADOT of 13.8. He has a 28.2 air yard share, and he's averaging over 16 yards per reception. And he also has the highest yards after catch per reception among pass catchers on the Chargers as well. So whenever you think about receivers that can be a big play option for their offense like QJ has been, there are very few quarterbacks I'd rather have them attached to than Justin Herbert. And to my surprise, his first read percentage is only about 2.5% lower than Ladd's as well. So, I mean, QJ is involved in this offense, man, as wild as that is to say after the rookie year he had. And now this week he gets a matchup against the Ravens, which have been the best matchup for fantasy receivers the entire year. Doesn't matter if you look at the last 5 weeks, the last 8 weeks, the entire season, they are the best matchup for fantasy receivers. Last week against the Steelers is damn near the only good game that the Ravens secondary has had the entire year. So, and on top of that, Baltimore gives up the second highest percentage of fantasy points to receivers that line up out wide. And that is where QJ lines up on over 91% of his routes so far this year. So, we've got the good quarterback play. We've got the big play ability. We've got the matchup where he lines up where Baltimore has been, most vulnerable. So as weird as it is to say, Quentin Johnston is a smash play for me this week.
Hey man, I'm as big of a Ladd McConkey guy as anybody, but let's have some fun after QJ was just written off after one season. The fact that he's come back this year, I mean,
love it, man. Yeah, it's great.
I'm so happy for that guy for sure.
It's great to see. It's great to see. Real quick before we move on any further.
Thank you.
Rugaroo, man, so sorry to hear that. Yeah, if you believe in the power of prayer, I'll be praying for you. But regardless, you'll be in my thoughts. I hate to hear that, man. Cancer's a bitch, and nobody deserves to go through that. So nothing but the best wishes for you, man. I hope you make it out of that.
Yeah.
Exact same sentiments. And I'm glad that you can, take some time and hopefully bring a smile to your face.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we appreciate you. We appreciate you having taken the time with us. Just always a blessing whenever you guys hang out with us on Wednesday nights, especially with everything you're going through right now. We're hoping we can put a smile on your face tonight, Rugaroo. So
100%.
Getting back,
just to add to it, Keith added to my take here. Chargers since week 6, highest rate of first down pass attempts in the NFL. Once Herbie was healthy and fired up, the Chargers have been letting it rip. And like he said, they've been better for it. Who would have thought? You let one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL throw the football and good things happen.
Yeah, shocker.
Yeah, funny thing. So getting into our third smash play of the week, guys, I'm just gonna go ahead and take a shot in the dark this week because we did this last week with Jonnu Smith. We took that shot in the dark and it ended up 28.3 fantasy points. What a week Jonnu had last week. Over 100 yards. Just fantastic week. So I'm going to pat myself in the back for that smash play last week and hopefully keep it rolling with the winning streak with Jatavian Sanders going against the Kansas City Chiefs. And whenever I was doing some research today, Pat Fitzmaurice at Fantasy Pros put it perfectly as to why Jatavian Sanders is now a must start. Since week 5, he's had a 14.4% target share, 1.76 yards per route run. He's been the first read on 12.8% of plays in that offense. And the Chiefs are, in fact, a great defense. We can all agree with that. But against tight ends, they allow the second most fantasy points per game to the position. So if there is a spot where they are gettable, it's at the tight end position. And since week 5, which we just talked about, Jatavian Sanders has played 70% of snaps in all but one of those games. He's had multiple games with 5 or more targets. He's had a couple tight end 1 weeks when he's gotten in the end zone. He's been a sneaky good option for the Carolina Panthers. And on top of that, he has been the top tight end in football at creating separation at 2.59 yards of separation per target. All that to say is that for a guy that didn't test well at the combine, he's come out this rookie season is really starting to show that sometimes those combine numbers don't matter. You can just get out and play ball. And as a former 5-star guy, he's shown the ability to do that. And this week, despite the good matchup, he is ranked as the tight end 19 in the expert consensus rankings, which tells me this. There's a very good likelihood with his role in the offense. We can safely say that with it being Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, and Jatavian Sanders as your top of the options, you can very easily see a week where Jatavian Sanders is the second option at offense, which is the sweet spot for tight end. So he's a strong play to outperform his ECR this week, and for me, he's a smash play because of that.
I mean, given given how well your tight end calls played out last week, even though I'm not as big of a Jatavian Sanders guy, but be willing to give you the benefit of the doubt because you nailed it with your tight end calls last week, and I'm starting to feel like you're like a tight end whisperer or something. So I'm going to be plugging Jatavian Sanders in a few. I don't have him in redraft anywhere, but I'll definitely be plugging him into some DFS lineups because of you throwing that out there.
Oh, well, no pressure at all on my part. So, recapping that second set of smash players, we had Hunter Henry. We had Quentin Johnston, and we had Jatavian Sanders. So getting into the non-fun part, talking about pass plays. Nate, we know we have a love-hate, mostly hate relationship with DeAndre Swift because there are about 4 weeks a year where he looks like the best running back in football. And then the other 13 weeks of the year where he is just not that guy. And you feel like he's going to have a not that guy week this week. Not to mention, he's nursing that groin injury, so he may not even see the field. But if he does see the field, what don't you like about him this week?
Well, one, playing with a groin injury is one of the most reoccurring injuries that has a tendency to spring back up on players, especially at the running back position. So you're already kind of playing with a little bit of a danger card. And then Keith in the chat, if you're listening, you didn't see us pop that up. Keith brought up Roshan's involvement, which last week was 88% of short down and distance snaps, 82% of long down and distance snaps, 67% of inside the 5 snaps. There it is right there. Thank you. 100% of 2-minute drill snaps and 10 carries for the first time since week 5. He also gets the Minnesota Vikings, who, with an offense that is susceptible to pressure and blitzing, there's ancillary effects on the running back as well when Caleb Williams is going to be under duress, especially if that means they get behind, because I don't think that personally, I just don't see the Bears leaning too heavily on DeAndre Swift with the groin, with the success that they've seen, if they're going to slowly integrate Roshan into the equation. But, just more importantly, Minnesota is one of those teams that if I can avoid, if you can, that's the hard thing when you're talking about passing a player with this many bye weeks. We all know what these mean. If you don't have a better option, yeah. But anytime I can avoid that Brian Flores-led defense and all the other factors, I'm going to do so.
Yeah.
With you.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Drew.
Sorry, I'm looking up some stuff for a question we have in the chat. My apologies. I'll throw it up right here real quick. Since we're talking tight end rest of season, play 1, drop 2, TJ Hawkinson, Pat Fryermuth, or Tucker Kraft. I just called you the tight end whisperer, man, so it's only right to let you go first if you have a strong take on this between these guys.
All right, there's an unquestioned drop for Armuth at this point. He just hasn't shown it this season for me. And he's had multiple weeks where, he's had over 10 points, but hasn't really had a major week to say, hey, we can plug him in and feel confident that there's real upside here. So Muth is an immediate drop for me. So it comes down to Hawkinson and Kraft. Hawkinson is a guy that's just starting to get his way back. In 2 weeks ago against the Jaguars, had 9 targets, 8 catches, 72 yards with a long of 26, but still coming off of that injury, still working his way back. And Tucker Kraft, one of the top guys in the position at receiving touchdowns, but also a little bit hit or miss for the most part. So it's a matter of consistency and what you're looking for right now. So for me, until TJ Hawkinson shows that he's going to get back in that role where he's going to be one of the top 2 targets in that offense, which I think it could come, but he also has Addison to contend with. I'm going to go with Tucker Kraft right now simply because of the touchdown upside.
Yeah, Green Bay has the 9th toughest strength of schedule rest of season, not counting Week 18 because we don't play fantasy football in Week 18. If you do, I apologize. I did not include that in the data. But 9th toughest for Green Bay, and then 16th toughest for Minnesota. So kind of middle of the road for Hawkinson. So Hawkinson has the better schedule rest of season, and he's starting to kind of come along. So I'm with you. Muth is out of the question for me. It's right between Hawkinson and Kraft. And that is a tough decision, man. Because I think Tucker Kraft is going to have the better quarterback play the rest of the way. I trust Jordan Love more than I do Sam Darnold. God, Nate, do you lean one way or the other on this between these two? Because I'm struggling here.
I lean Hawkinson. Strength of schedule aside, they've got 2 matchups. So this matchup against Chicago is one that I'm focused on because you talk about the outside corners in Chicago that should create more of a funnel to the interior. I know it's always going to be Justin Jefferson, but Hawkinson should see an uptick in targets there. Arizona's been susceptible across the board for the most part until the last couple weeks, which I'll talk about that here in a little bit too. But then they get Atlanta, then Chicago again, Seattle and Green Bay. Week 18 be gone against Detroit. But I think that the path to being the number 2 target is clearer in Minnesota than it is in Green Bay, just because I don't know who the wide receiver 1, 2, or 3 in Green Bay any given week is. That's the strength of Jordan Love, is being able to progress through his reads and actually not have a significant one outside of Jaden Reed pretty much given week in and week out. So I would lean Hawkinson. Rhett makes good points as far as why it's Kraft. So at this point, you either have to play tiebreaker and go Hawkinson, but I think we know for sure we're dropping Fryermuth.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Thoughts on trading Flowers for Jennings? I know it's not eye-popping, but I'd rather not face that week 14 bye, and the inconsistency has been killing me. I'll just say this, in a vacuum, I would much rather have Zay Flowers over Juwan Jennings, just because we haven't really seen what this offense looks like with all the San Francisco pieces healthy. Both for fantasy wide receivers, both the strength of schedule for the rest of the season isn't that big of a difference. San Francisco's is slightly easier, but not big enough of a difference for me to want to go from Flowers to Jennings. So unless you're just like, man, if I don't win in week 14, I'm not making the fantasy playoffs. And if I can't plug in Juwan Jennings and place Zay Flowers on bye, that's going to make or break my season. Like if it's that desperate of a situation, then I might consider it. But in a vacuum, personally, I would prefer Flowers. I don't know if you guys disagree.
I do not disagree. I'd rather have Flowers too, but Rhett?
No, I completely agree. Flowers is the guy because with those spike weeks that you get, he's currently the wide receiver 8 in fantasy football for the season. So I mean, Zay Flowers, yes, the inconsistency is maddening, but at the same time, when he's up, man, he is tremendous. So I would rather have the upside and the possibility of having a 35-point week in your back pocket in your lineups on a weekly basis.
Agreed.
All right. So Kay asks, trade away George Pickens for James Cook. PPR format. He has Chase, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Najee, George Pickens, Lad McConkey, and Marvin Harrison Jr.
I'll start. Me personally, I wouldn't, even though I think that the trade might be beneficial as far as both players rest of season who has the maybe better ranking amongst their particular peers. But when I look at that decision with Cook, week in and week out, if you're going to choose between Jacobs, Chase Brown, Najee, and Cook, I don't see him standing out above that group myself. Now, I know James Cook has been solid. I like to attach to that Buffalo offense, and Pickens has been, Pickens has been tricky. But you name me another wide receiver.
Haven't been there for Pickens, man.
I know. What other wide receiver in the league can get 2 yards on 1st and 10 or 2nd and 10 and get a first down? Well, self-celebrated first down, but that's a wide receiver right there. I mean, that is incredible. I don't know. Maybe I'm on an island by myself. Maybe you guys would do it. I'm intrigued to hear it because I trust both of your opinions. Rhett, what do you think?
Trade away Pickens for James Cook. I'm looking at this lineup right now with his running backs. I mean, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Najee Harris. I mean, among those 3 guys, that probably makes Cook his first or second running back along with Chase Brown. So I think I'm really good with that. I think you get stronger across the board. I think having Jamar Chase covers up a lot of deficiencies. I think Lad McConkey has been good enough to be a wide receiver 2. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has been good enough to be a wide receiver 3, borderline wide receiver 2 himself. So for me, I think in order to have the overall strength of team, I think you go ahead and make that deal and feel good about it.
Yeah, if I'm making the assumption that you're only starting 2 running backs here. I would rather just fire up Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown. I think you can feel really good about those guys rest of season. I would rather fire them up and still have Jamar, Pickens, Lad, and Marv in my lineup. James Cook has been solid, and I think in a vacuum, I think Pickens for James Cook straight up, I think is a very fair trade. I don't think it's a bad trade at all. But the Bills' strength of schedule for running backs rest of the season is pretty tough, whereas Pickens has one of the most favorable schedules rest of the way for fantasy receivers. And the only thing really working against him to where his fantasy finishes haven't looked better is he's just had some really bad touchdown luck. And if I was a betting man, which I am, I would be betting that would turn around in Pickens' favor. And I want that in my lineup whenever it does happen. So for me, I would stand with Pickens, assuming that you're not in a league where you have to like start 3 running backs or something like that for some reason. I think you got a good setup.
All right. So, and then our boy Conway asking in a deep league flex, Schoonmaker or Trey Tucker. Never thought we'd see this question on Fourth and Frames, but here we are, fellas.
Yeah, this is the gross of gross. But honestly, if assuming Jake Ferguson doesn't play, if he misses time with the concussion, I'll fire up Luke Shoemaker over Trey Tucker. He's got to play Denver, which is a brutal matchup for fantasy receivers. He's already not doing much anyway. And then you got Luke Shoemaker, who, what did he have, like 10 targets last week? I think it was something like that. I think he hit double-digit targets with, and that's with Ferguson going down in the middle, during the game. So if there's no Jake Ferguson, I would flex Shoemaker over Trey Tucker.
Flip side of that, do we really expect Cooper Rush to throw the ball another 55 times?
Yes,
in a game.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
The
same coaching staff that had him do it last week is still there. So yeah, I think that if they're down again, which I expect that they will be, I don't put it past them to just tell them to go do it again. Which it might be Trey Lance next week. Who knows?
55 is probably a high bar.
Not exactly 55, but I think that they will still
40.
throw the ball plenty.
Let's go 40 and say that he gets 17-18% target share. Now you're talking 8-9 targets, and I think that's more than Tucker.
I'm still good with that. I think that's more
I'm
than
still
what
fine.
Tucker gets,
Me
right?
too. Might not be beneficial, but talked earlier, Rico Dowdle. If he can pop off some explosive plays and keep the chains moving, then the likelihood of 40 plus passing attempts is there, because he won't get much more than 10 rushing attempts. And let's hope that they can force some turnovers against the Commanders. But Charlene has a question as well, Brett.
Roshan over Alex Madison. I'll go ahead and take this. I say yes, absolutely, especially with the fact that the Raiders are having struggles right now at the position. And we mentioned Roshan's snap share and usage last week ad nauseum. If DeAndre Swift doesn't go, I think it's another solid week for Roshan Johnson. So I think I prefer Roshan over Madison this week. What about you guys?
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, Madison didn't practice today either, and that's all trending in the wrong direction for that backfield when they're talking about Amir Abdullah and Dylan Lobby getting work. And they picked a person up off practice. I think brought a running back off the practice squad. So
it's never
usually that's not a great sign on Wednesday for the running back room.
Right. So getting back into our past players for the week, Drew, we mentioned earlier, we talked some Jonathan Brooks. We mentioned Chuba Hubbard. We mentioned the Kansas City Chiefs defense a little bit earlier. Kansas City Chiefs for running backs has been a recipe for disaster. But is there anything else that's going into your Chuba Hubbard being a guy you want to pass on this week?
There is, but this is partially just the weekly edition of, hey, don't start your running backs against the Kansas City Chiefs. I think I talked about it last week, but it's just absurd. So I'm going to say it again. Whenever it comes to schedule-adjusted fantasy points given up to running backs, the Chiefs has been the toughest matchup all year, in which we know that. That's not breaking news. But the Vikings, they've been the second toughest matchup on the year. And yet the gap between the Chiefs and the Vikings is the same as the gap between the Vikings and the 10th toughest run defense. Like they haven't just been – the Chiefs haven't just been tough against the run. They have been unreal. And while I don't think he's going to have a huge workload in his first game of his career, finally coming off the IR, I do think you have to at least factor in the fact that Jonathan Brooks is making his debut a little bit. Like that has to be a part of the equation, right? And so, kind of like what I was talking about with Tampa this week, having a positive game script for Bucky Irving against the New York Giants. Call me crazy. I don't see a positive game script in the future for Chuba Hubbard and the Carolina Panthers against Kansas City this week. I think they're going to be playing catch up. And so I don't think that there's going to be a ton of extra carries to go Chuba's way either. And whenever the Panthers were trying to work in Miles Sanders into the lineup and, before they realized, man, this guy really just stinks and we just can't keep doing this to ourselves, it was in the passing game. That was where Miles Sanders was getting his work. And I think that's where Jonathan Brooks will see most of his snaps early on. So if they do fall behind, I think that Brooks could get some more involvement there because, he does have passing game chops as well. So I know bye weeks are brutal. I know that the injuries don't help either, but given how late you were able to draft Chuba this year, hopefully you have some better options this week, because I think if at all possible, you need to pass on Chuba Hubbard this week.
Yeah, and you're right. Just the rule of thumb has been don't start against the Chiefs running backs. and don't start him. It's not going to work. It's not great for you. So, I mean, yeah, just continuing that trend, continuing that very smart piece of logic in fantasy football probably does you well. So, yeah, Chuba's been great all year, but it's probably time to avoid him this week as well. And the same for me with my first pass play in Matthew Stafford against the Eagles. Drew, I'm sorry. But you mentioned it earlier. I hope you enjoyed these last few weeks with Matt Stafford having Puka and Cooper Kupp together, because it's rough sledding for the rest of the season, for the rest of the fantasy season. There are 4 straight tough matchups coming up for Matt Stafford. And yes, the band is back together. Puka and Cooper Kupp are both ECR top 10 fantasy wide receivers this week. I just don't see a world where both of them end up being top 10 guys this week. And why is that? Simply because if you look at the Philadelphia Eagles defense against positions in fantasy football, they are top 5 against every position in fantasy football. And that includes quarterback, where they've only given up a 30-plus point game to a Baker Mayfield unicorn game and a 21.6 point game to Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars a few weeks back. Besides that, they've been about as dominant against the pass game as the Chiefs have been against the run game this year. It's been clamps. It's been hard to overcome, so it's just hard for me to put my faith in Matthew Stafford when you're facing that sort of defense who's had that kind of success against the pass game this year.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to agree with you on this one, but I am inclined to agree. I'm worried about Stafford this week, unfortunately.
Yeah, the pass rush has really gotten to where people were expecting them to be. And then once they really moved Cooper DeJean to the slot role, he's really solidified all aspects of that pass D. So it's definitely a treacherous road for Stafford and company. But, you know, I got your back, Drew. Screw Rhett.
Appreciate you. And then Roshan and Brooks, the same argument I made against Chuba applies to Brooks as well, even though I could see him getting some passing down work, but I would still go with Roshan there.
Mm-hmm. Likewise.
Yeah, so pass plays for our first ones: DeAndre Swift against the Minnesota Vikings, Chuba Hubbard against the Kansas City Chiefs, Matthew Stafford against the Philadelphia Eagles. Nate Markham, you're deciding to take a stand against one of my favorite guys in all of fantasy football. He's one of my favorite up and down guys. He's my favorite roller coaster ride at the wide receiver position. He's great some weeks. He's just fine the other weeks. All in all, he's just JSN. When you see where I see love, you see a friend. So go ahead and tell me why he is a pass against the Arizona Cardinals this week.
You said he's a roller coaster, and unfortunately, the person standing in his way is kind of like the moose that said that's sorry, folks, park's closed. And unfortunately, the roller coaster ride of JSN this week might be closed because, shockingly, I never would have thought I'd say this, but Garrett Williams has been a slot deflector in the season. I mean, if you look at the season as a whole, he's 5th amongst slot corners with a 81.9% NFL QB rating allowed. He's had provided the 5th lowest yards allowed per coverage snap. Obviously, you get DK Metcalf back. I like JSN as a receiver. I think that going into the season, if I was looking at Week 11 matchup at the beginning of the year and I saw Arizona on the schedule, I would have just immediately assumed that would be a smash play. But shockingly, like, I had to look this up and I still don't know if I believe it or not. Like, maybe I just hit a wrong button, but we talked earlier about Arizona's run defense and how that's typically an easy matchup, right, Drew? You had talked about Arizona. Over the last 4 weeks, they've allowed the fewest rushing yards in the NFL. Now, is that because teams are passing on them? Potentially, but they're definitely not passing on them through the slot. And so you look at that combination. I think maybe this might just be an overall letdown week for the Seattle Seahawks. And I didn't think going in. Sometimes that's when you're shocked with some of the statistics that you come across. And Garrett Williams has shocked me. So sorry, folks. Sign up front should say JSN needs to be this high to ride that ride. And unfortunately, he's not. Kyler won't be riding with him either, if that makes it any better.
Yeah, we know that those signs are not kind to Kyler, but yeah, That's bad news to me, Nate, because I've got a lot of JSN and a lot of flex spots that I was hoping to be able to count on in this week. And I'm going to have to go take a second look now because you have convinced me I am officially worried about JSN this week.
Yeah. I mean, not to mention I kind of had him as one of my playing fades guys this week in my article. But you know what? Maybe I'll do some research. Maybe we'll try to convince people otherwise. Because you know what? If there's nothing I like to be at times, contrarian is definitely one of the things I love
so
being
fun,
when I
isn't it?
can. So, you know, where you're going to zig, I'm going to zag right now and try to find reasons we should play JSN this week. So, but Drew, speaking of guys that we are kind of just, we have no idea at this point what this Green Bay passing offense is going to look like on a weekly basis. I mean, we've seen Jaden Reed have weeks. We've seen Romeo Doubs have weeks. We've seen Dontavian Weeks have weeks. We saw Christian Watson have a week last week. We've seen Tucker Kraft have weeks. All this to say, we don't know what the hell is going to happen with this Green Bay passing offense on a weekly basis. So why is Jaden Reed the guy you're picking on this week against the Niners?
Man, talk about an up and down year for Jaden Reed. He was the wide receiver 1 in week 1, the wide receiver 2 in week 4. You're like, man, wheels up. He's about to have a huge year. Those are his only 2 finishes inside the top 12 on the season. And on top of that, he's had 5 finishes outside of the top 40 receivers on the week. And I'm afraid this week's going to be another rough one. The Packers have a matchup against the 49ers defense. That's been the 6th toughest matchup for fantasy receivers over the last 6 weeks. And it's not just that. San Fran is also giving up 22% less fantasy points to receivers that are lined up in the slot compared to receivers that line up out wide. And Jaden Reed's lining up in the slot on 80% of his snaps on the year. So, Jaden Reed, he's a really fun player. He can blow up any given week with just a few touches, and they design touches for him. They get him involved whenever he's on the field. But, given the matchup and where he lines up and where San Francisco is strongest in their secondary, I'm going to have to pass on Jaden Reed this week.
Yeah, like I said, it's hard to blame you if for no other reason, like we said, you just laid out a tremendous case. But Green Bay receivers in general, man, it's just hard to know where they're going to go on a weekly basis. It's I don't know what to do with it. So the best thing for me right now is if people were to ask me which Green Bay receiver should I start right now, I would say whichever one you feel good about in a flex spot.
I'm going to tell you, for me, it's Christian Watson at this point.
Really?
I think he has the most big playability. His separation numbers have looked really good as of late. He's just got to be healthy. But as long as Christian Watson's healthy, I think he's the guy that I want to start in a vacuum. And then this week as well, he'll probably be my highest rated Green Bay Packers receiver just because of him lining up on the outside more often. And that's where San Fran tends to get beat compared to in the slot. So for this week and rest of season, I think Christian Watson might be the guy that I would be most comfortable starting. But my God, that was scary to even come out and say. But I think that's where I'm at this point.
Appreciate your confidence in saying that, man.
Yeah, I said that with that was a very shaky tone that I said that. I don't feel good about it, but I think that's where I'm at though.
Yeah, they avoid Chicago rest of season as far as rest of fantasy season because they don't play them till week 18. They get some good matchups, with Minnesota's been pretty susceptible against outside receivers. Who else they get? New Orleans. No earmuffs. Rhett, obviously without Lattimore and Kool-Aid still being banged up. But then, Detroit, Miami,
Seattle.
It's not terrible. I mean, especially because Seattle, Devin Witherspoon will take out Jaden Reed, meaning Christian Watson pretty much will have just Christian Watson. I agree with you.
Yeah, So speaking of guys we want to pass on, for me, and this hurts me so much because I'm a big Tank Dell guy, big Tank Dell fan heading into the season, and he's got the Tennessee Titans. But guys, first, let's just go ahead and say it. Like between injuries, the way things have kind of played out in that offense, it hasn't been there for Tank Dell this season, and it's not going to be there going forward because Andrew Cooper, friend of the show, had a tremendous tweet today. Don't know if you guys saw this, but he said, one time in high school, I got kicked out of a class in a class where we were watching the movie Fried Green Tomatoes and got put into a class where they were watching the movie Office Space. That's Joe Mixon's 2024 season in a nutshell.
That's good.
Which is a great tweet. But I'm looking at the Joe Mixon game log right now. Outside of week 2 against Chicago, where he had 9 catches for 25 yards.
Dude.
9 carries, 25 yards. And against the Detroit Lions, who have shut down everybody, where he had 25 carries for 46 yards, and he still had a touchdown. Joe Mixon has been over 100 yards in every game that he's played this season, and he missed weeks 3, 4, and 5. But when Joe Mixon has been in the lineup for the Houston Texans, he has been arguably the best running back in fantasy football. And the Texans have noticed that, and they have very quickly hitched their wagons to being a team that is making the choice to evolve. And instead of being this pass first, pass often team, they realize, hey, we've got a stud running back. We should probably ride that and learn how to grind out games. And it's been great for them as a team. And it's been great for Joe Mixon's fantasy value. What it hasn't been good for is Tank Dell's fantasy value, because right now in this offense, it's safe to say Joe Mixon is your alpha, Nico Collins is your beta, and Tank Dell is kind of just a guy in that offense right now. I mean, the last 2 weeks, he's been wide receiver 46 and wide receiver 43. He's only had one wide receiver 1 week all season long. And another week, he's been the wide receiver 3 throughout the season. And he's even got like a wide receiver 1 something in there this season. That might be the injury week. I didn't do that much research on it, but he's got some really bad weeks in there too on top of that. So for me and Tank Dell, look, this hurts me more than most people because I'm a huge fan of him as a player. But with the way the Texans have been trending, and yes, they're still passing the ball on 57% of snaps right now, but with the way this offense is trending and the fact that it just seems like it's going to be Joe Mixon's show until it's not, especially with high leverage touches and things like that. I mean, it's just hard to put faith in Tank Dell right now. So with him being ranked around the mid-20s in the ECR, it's a hard spot for me to even put faith in him, even at that level right now.
Yeah, with Mixon, one of the difficult things to look at too is that it's not these big break-off runs where the offense is just, explosive down the field. They're drive sustaining and they're continuing to feed him. I mean, I'm looking at his rushing numbers as far as like percentage of big runs, where, I mean, he ranks 30th in like runs of 3+ yards out of 52 backs. 5-yard runs or more, he's 41st out of 53. So, and it's not a negative. I mean, that's just he's getting it's who he is, and those that just is a testament to me that says Houston is comfortable feeding him the ball that many times to get to the numbers that he's getting, which overall reduces the volume that the wide receivers are going to have, especially spread amongst two wide receivers, 3 if Colby's still listening. Colby, we love Houston. Jorge is wrong about Jorge made the comparison of Jaleel McLaughlin to Tank Dell on Sunday, and I don't think they've been friends since, mostly from an efficiency standpoint and metrics, and it was rather interesting.
Quite the battle, huh?
Yeah, there was a Tank Dell tweet today that Derek Brown released about Tank Dell's separation over the last 5 or 6 weeks. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Jorge, who Kobe is still here. Jorge is dead to me.
Since week 6, amongst 76 qualifying wide receivers, he's 6th in separation, 1st in route win rate. But you have those high metrics, lower volume, and what do you think? The chicken or egg conversation.
Yeah.
Metrics or production, and I'm shocked.
You're gonna take production every time.
You almost always do, but yet I was shocked, and I'm sorry dragging this on. I know we're running past the time and all, but Jorge, and this is in defense of like his approach towards IDP, is that I agree. I'm looking at metrics. I'm not looking at production for like pass rush efficiencies. I'm looking at those underlying numbers and saying,
Right.
don't trust the numbers, trust the process and the production. And I don't know if efficiency and metrics like that are one and the same, but that's an interesting tweet by Derek Brown. So, Rhett, I'm going to do all I can to find every reason to zag when you're zigging on Tank Dell.
That's fine. I'm good with that.
You want to know, you guys, you want to know a really interesting stat nugget though? Ryan Heath, who does great work. If you're not following him on Twitter, you're making a huge mistake because he gives so much great knowledge for free on his Twitter account. But this offseason, he did an incredible study for different positions on what the most predictive stats were for future fantasy production. And one of, like, across the board, what one of the most predictive stats were for future fantasy production?
Previous fantasy production.
You got it. Yeah. So, underlying metrics have a place and they matter. They're important, but producing while you're on the field also matters. And so it's weird because we got that with Tank Dell last year, right? Like, he had the previous production, and then this year it's just like, so that's where the struggle with Tank Dell is with me. Like, we saw the production last year, and now this year he's struggling, but the underlying metrics are there. So it's like, maybe it's getting cooked up now, and he's about to hit his stride. I'm trying to paint a hopeful picture because I'm in a serious. I know everybody cares about everybody else's fantasy leagues, especially an hour and 20 minutes into a podcast.
Exactly.
But I'm in a Sirius XM Independence Day league where I lost Chris Godwin, and after Jamar Chase, two of my next receivers are JSN and Tank Dell. And you guys just basically told me I have no chance to win this week. So I'm coping. That's all it is.
Oh, you have a chance. Might be a single digit chance, but no, we hope we're both wrong. If there's ever a time to be wrong, is when we're rooting for our brother.
Yeah, it's on your behalf for sure.
I appreciate that.
And then I once heard this on professional wrestling by a little dweeby wrestler where he said any man with two hands has a fighting chance. So
that's right.
That's for you, Drew. That's for you, buddy. So really quickly before we get out of here, we're not going to spend any time on it, but we kind of want to give our listeners our stash plays for the week just really quickly. No explanation. Nate, who's your guy for the week?
Mentioned him earlier briefly, Dylan Lobby. If the Raiders have some injuries and Lobby can get some workload, maybe he can carve out a role going forward for a pretty bad team, but touches are touches.
Drew?
Cam Akers, the touches are trending in the right direction. I was going to practice what I preach and pick up Cam Akers in our 4th and Frames listener league, but that son of a bitch Albert outbid me by $3. So, but the underlying metrics don't look good, but they don't look good for Aaron Jones either. And so, he's one of those guys. We were talking about handcuffs earlier. That if you can forecast a world where if the lead back goes down, does the handcuff get the majority of the work? I think that's the case with Cam Akers in Minnesota. So if you have an empty roster spot, I would throw him on your bench.
And for me, it's Elijah Moore, currently rostered in 20% of sleeper leagues. Since Jameis Winston has taken over, Elijah Moore's usage has seen a very big uptick. Heading into the playoffs, you can't discount that. So
very interesting. Elijah Moore as a pickup. Let's go with the rewind machine. Week 6, week 7. I think I got a snicker out of you two when I said Elijah Moore's name,
You did.
And rightfully so. But you know what? Guess what? He's still not owned enough. So no one listens to me. Luckily, Rhett, everybody should listen to you because honestly, you're much more talented at this than I am. I 100% back that up for you.
We got one more question before we get out of here. Adrian says, "Hey guys, do I sit CD for Mike Evans rest of season? I'm starting Cup and I need one more." So I guess he's starting 2 receivers. He's got Cup plugged in and he's trying to figure out rest of season. Should he go with Mike Evans over CD Lamb? Which I imagine is a question he probably didn't see himself having to ask at the beginning of the season of the year. But this is where we're at now. With Cooper Rush, possibly Trey Lance playing quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. So would Mike Evans or CeeDee Lamb rest of season? Who do you guys got?
Man, there might be a discussion to throw Cooper Kupp's name into that equation some weeks just because you talk about weeks 15, 16, and you get San Francisco and the Jets. And while the Jets haven't been that quite dominant secondary, any given week, it does concern me just a little bit more so than when I'm looking at CD against a little bit easier matchups. I don't have Mike Evans in front of me. Maybe one of you guys do that can build it up. But CD and the Cowboys will get the Giants, Bengals, the Panthers, and the Bucks before they get the Eagles in week 17. But to answer the easy way, yes, I'm comfortable with Evans over CD in a vacuum given most weeks, but I do think matchup dependent would dictate my decision with those three. Rhett?
I'm going to say CD simply because of this. I'm a big believer that a backup quarterback just does not move through those progressions as quickly. So
Yes.
when you have a super stud like CD Lamb, you kind of just tend to try to look for him in most occasions. So I think there's some big target weeks coming ahead for him, especially if they continue to throw the ball like they did last week.
Yeah, I really think you have to take it week by week, truly. Like, I don't think it's one of those things where you can just plug it in rest of the season and call it a day. Like, I'll use week 14 for an example. Dallas plays Cincinnati, which is a great matchup for receivers. Tampa Bay plays Vegas, which you see Vegas on the schedule and you're like, oh, cool, great matchup. Vegas sucks, but they're actually really tough against fantasy receivers, partially because of the defense and partially just because teams don't really have to throw against them very often. And then Cup has Buffalo, who they're kind of middle of the road against receivers, so that might be a situation where Mike Evans might be the option to sit that week. So in a vacuum, I would say I would rather have Mike Evans over CeeDee Lamb rest of season. But I truly do think it's a week by week type of thing where you just kind of got to play the matchups and, like I said, take it week by week.
Yeah. Great advice on Drew Scott's behalf, as we get every week from both of you,
And you
perfect
as well.
human beings. So, hey, y'all are just dragging me along for the ride sometimes, fellas, and I appreciate y'all for it.
Sure.
But, guys, we've been here an hour and a half. You're probably tired of hearing our voices, but I'm not tired of hearing these guys' voices ever. And if you want to continue to hear their opinions, find them on X, Drew at Drew3MR, Nate at Nate Markham, me at Armanuel Sports. So for the fellas, for Fantasy and Frames, don't forget, like, subscribe, review, help us out wherever you can. Fourth and Frames, we gone. Toodles.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.